Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, the show right here on Let's Talk Entertainment, where going back to about 2018, I've been attempting to read and review each of the roughly 600 short stories written by the late, great Ray Bradbury in his long career. Today, we're up to our 261st story, which comes from the 2002 collection, One More from the Road. Today's story is First Day, and it is the first of 25 stories in this collection. If you're new to the channel and new to the show, the way that this works is I do a brief synopsis of what happens in the story, sort of all the plot, action, and character, and then sort of wrap it up with just some very, some light analysis, I guess, of what I think it all means to me, what I took away from it. Is it a good story worth your time to read? And I think today's story is very much worth your time to read. So, all right then, at breakfast while reading the newspaper, Charles Douglas suddenly realizes that today is the first day of school. No, he's not going to school. He's an old man. However, his wife can't calm him down. He's very excited about this first day of school for some reason. She inquires why, and he realizes, or he tells her that 50 years ago I made a pact with my best friends, whose names are Ross, Jack, and Gordon, that we're going to meet around the flagpole of the school where we graduated from to catch up on old times. So his wife reminds him that he remembers and saves everything. He has a room upstairs with movie posters and old collectible toys and all these other things. And he's even collected the letters that he's written them over the years that were never returned. So she just wants to soften the blow if they don't show up. But he insists they're going to show up because we're best friends. Nothing can keep us apart. So Charles dashes out of the house, gets into the car, and begins driving the 30 miles to the school. And his speed rises and falls with the changes in his mood. At one moment, he's certain that they're coming, and he's very excited, and he's thinking about the past. And then the next minute, he sort of wonders if, what if something's changed and they're not coming, and what if, am I good enough? Have I done enough with my lifetime to sort of warrant having these conversations with these guys who are no doubt more successful than I am? He himself is a published author who's done like 6 novels at this point, and hundreds of short stories and even plays and stuff like that. So he's quite successful, even if he doesn't really admit it in his own mind. So eventually he arrives at the school. There's kids milling him around, and he doesn't want to look too out of place, but eventually the school bell rings. They all go inside, and it leaves just 4 men standing at a distance on sort of equidistant points around the flagpole, sort of looking at each other. They're old and gray, he notices, and they don't say anything, and they sort of back away slowly over time and then sort of wave and say goodbye without actually using any words. Eventually he arrives home to his wife, who's making him eggs and bacon, and she asks him, how did it go? He says, they all came, and, did you talk a lot? And he said, yeah, we talked forever. And of course, we know that not to be true. Meanwhile, he sits there and, sort of looking over his empty plate, tears come to his eyes, and he realizes that in fact was not the first day of school, but in a sense, the last day of school. So I really like this story. I think it was powerful, it was relatable, it was well written, as you expect from Bradbury. Everything he does is pretty well written. He has a dependable prose style, which I don't talk about much anymore because pretty much you can count on every story being the same in that respect. Not a lot of exploration in terms of the prose style and the format, but the tales within that format, in his sort of safe writing range, is very, very well done. Charles Douglas in this case is obviously another surrogate for Ray Bradbury, whose full name is Raymond Douglas Bradbury. He's an author. He was known to collect large quantities of things. He never threw anything away. Apparently, in the last year or so, his family donated like 30,000 pounds of paper to a university to sort of sort through and sort of document his writing notes and all of that. So he was very much that type of person, which I find sort of relatable. I don't save everything, but I don't change much either. And it's sort of like, if you could look into my mind, the images, the books, they're all the same. The story, though, it's an emotional roller coaster. Lots of internal dialogue in the character's head, and that dialogue itself is in turmoil, constantly shifting back and forth between the positivity and negativity. One of hope and then one of despair, and ultimately, it's coming to terms with the fact that you have you've spent your years, and you've spent many of them looking in the past, which isn't a bad thing. But he's sort of so fixated on the past, perhaps, that he doesn't realize or fully comprehend or appreciate all the good that has come of his life, including his loving wife, including his pretty good writing career at this point. I love that at the flagpole, everything is said with the eyes of the characters, not words. Nobody says anything, but then when he gets home, his wife asks, and he says, yeah, we talked a ton, which they did, but they didn't have to say anything. They all sort of come to the same realization, I believe, that that their lives have passed by, they've departed from one another, out of each other's lives, and they still think about it, perhaps, but it's not who they are, what they are anymore. Their time together has ended, but they also can't necessarily bring themselves to confront each other and sort of compare notes to find out, who succeeded, who's good enough, who lived up to the high standards they presented for or predicted for themselves at an earlier time. And I think these are all probably pretty normal ways of thinking for most people, I would say. I've been out of high school since 2000, so here we are 25 years later. I've seen very few of those people. I too had a group of close male friends. There was 4 of us who were sort of going to take on the world, who I've not seen in the better part of 20 years, I would say, in most cases. I dwell on the past. I am a writer in a small fashion. I don't change much, so I find the whole thing very relatable in the character of Charles Douglas, who you might mistake for a person who never grew up, sort of never let go of childish things. But I think that we're finding, especially in this internet age, where there's a ton of people who, throughout their lives, they remain interested in a lot of the same things. It's not the only things they remain interested in, but you may look at an adult, who's doing, like myself, I do entertainment shows here on this channel. We talk about comic book movies and horror movies, and it's not the most mature stuff in a sense. I mean, that's underestimating it, because I think a lot of it is more mature than you think. But at the same time, it's not seen in some circles to this day as being dignified. I think that's changed a lot, where sort of the world of the geek the time of the geek has come, where it's okay to be a fan of these things. But there is still a segment of society that looks at it and says, oh, you're immature. Whereas I think most of us know that we like a lot of different things. We just happen to find it easy to talk about The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Captain America and things like that. So I tend to think that a lot of the writing world perhaps looked at Ray Bradbury in that way much of the time. He had a few stories that have sort of made it into the literary canon. They get anthologized in serious textbooks. But at the same time, I think people think of, he's just that silly science fiction guy, as if it's something silly about it. And I think that's not at all true. I think that underestimates Bradbury as an author and as a person, as an intellect. But yeah, there's a lot of that goes on in the world, and I think that we all sort of struggle. If we're interesting people, like me, I'm interesting, right? People like me, we wonder, though, it's almost as if for a long time you sort of had to have these interests in the closet, perhaps, and you don't necessarily spread it around to everyone, because they just don't get it. And yet, at the same time, the post-geek singularity has happened, and being a geek has gone mainstream in a sense, so there is more acceptance than there's ever been. But at the same time, you also doubt yourself as well. So there you have it. First day, which is actually, as we find out in the story, the last day. But that is the first of 25 new short stories in the collection, One More from the Road from 2002. Next time, which will be probably in a couple of days, maybe next weekend, heart transplant. So be sure to subscribe and tune in and see what that is all about. But thank you, and I hope that you enjoy a great story like this one. You can't go wrong with First Day. So thank you, and I will see you again soon.